At the banquet, I handed the small cake, of which I had already taken a bite, to Kieran Voss. Just as he was about to take it, a girl suddenly rushed in and slapped the cake away. "Evelyn Sinclair, you've gone too far." Then she turned to Kieran Voss, her voice filled with righteous determination. "Kieran Voss, you are destined to be the untouchable heir of the capital's elite. You don't need to accept anything from this woman. From now on, I will be the one to protect you." Kieran narrowed his eyes at her, his expression composed, his lips curling into a polite smile as he said, "Thank you." But only I knew he was furious. No one understood Kieran's possessiveness over me better than I did. He craved every part of me with a hunger so intense it bordered on madness. At the charity gala, I had just managed to escape the swarm of suitors the elders had shoved my way. Finally, I found a quiet corner to enjoy my little cake in peace, but a nagging sense of unease crept up on me. Even though I had made up an excuse to keep Kieran from coming for some reason, I couldn't shake the feeling that he already knew about the 7 blind dates the elders had lined up for me. God knows how jealous he'll be when he finds out. The last time he got possessive, he blindfolded me and punished me so thoroughly that just the memory made me shiver. My waist ached, my neck was sore, and every muscle in my body felt like it had been completely wrecked. Suddenly, a hand slipped around my waist from behind, pulling me into a familiar embrace. "Sister." Warm, damp breath brushed against my nape as a soft head burrowed into the crook of my neck, clinging to me like a needy puppy. The familiar scent of Joe Malone enveloped me. I frowned and whispered, "What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to stay home and behave?" That scent, normally so serene like the kind you'd find lingering in a church, was utterly misleading. How could someone who had spent over a decade in a chapel turn out to be such a dangerously possessive maniac? A faint sting bloomed at the back of my neck as his teeth gently sank in, followed by a low, husky voice. "I missed you so much I couldn't stand it. I just wanted to see you." His lips brushed against my skin, his tone soft but laced with something far more dangerous. "Did I misbehave, sister? Is that why you went looking for other puppies to replace me?" By the time he reached the last sentence, his voice had dropped even lower, full of grievance, dripping with need. But I knew better than anyone just how dangerous Kieran was at this very moment. I heard his thoughts. "If sister falls in love with someone else, I'll just kill them all. Then lock her up in a golden cage so she belongs to me alone." I let out a soft sigh and reached up to smooth Kieran's hair, my voice gentle. "Have you eaten yet? Are you hungry?" Kieran nodded, his voice pitiful. "I didn't eat. Didn't feel like it without you." I sighed again. Kieran had always been like this. Ever since I met him, he never seemed to understand how to take care of himself properly. It was only after the old abbot passed away and my parents brought him home that he started eating 3 meals a day, though only because I watched over him. Otherwise, he truly would have lived like some ascetic monk, detached from the mortal world, as if his body didn't matter. I reached out and handed him the half-eaten cake on my plate. "It's too sweet. I don't like it. You can have it." The moment Kieran's hand was about to take the plate, someone suddenly rushed in from the side and slapped it away. Smack. The cake hit the floor with a splatter. "Evelyn, who do you think you are, making Kieran eat your leftovers?" The sharp voice rang out, filled with righteous indignation. A loud crash echoed through the air. The plate shattered on the floor. I turned my head and saw a girl in a server's uniform glaring at me with burning fury. It took me a second to recognize her. Skylar, a new transfer student in my class. Rumor had it that she came from a poor family and spent most of her time working part-time jobs outside of her required courses. I gave her a slow, mocking smile. "Oh, and how would you know what people with money can or can't do if you've never had any?" Skylar's face turned red with anger. She clenched her fists and barked at me again. "Kieran is a person, not your pet. Show some damn respect." Originally, this was a quiet, unnoticed corner of the gala, but thanks to her dramatic outburst, we had now drawn the attention of half the room. In that instant, I sensed the shift in Kieran's aura. Even his breathing had changed. I instinctively tightened my grip on his hand, pulling him back before he could react. "Don't waste your energy on irrelevant people," I murmured, my tone indifferent. "If I say you're mine, then you're mine." Kieran lowered his gaze, hiding the cold glint in his eyes. He went completely still, looking every bit like a fragile little thing that had been bullied into silence. Skylar, oblivious to the warning signs, mistook his quiet demeanor for submission. Her voice softened as she tried to comfort him. "Kieran, don't be afraid of her. From now on, I'll protect you. I won't let this wicked woman bully you ever again." Finally, Kieran lifted his gaze. His dark, almond-shaped eyes, always warm, always gentle, fixed on her. He smiled politely. "Thank you for your concern," he said, voice smooth and respectful. "But I am more than willing. Please do not interfere with my choices. It's annoying. The last word dropped like ice. Skylar, still clueless, continued to ramble on, completely unaware that she was standing on the edge of a cliff. I sighed. Before Kieran could snap, I flagged down the hotel manager. In the end, Skylar was forced to apologize to me and compensate for the Italian crystal porcelain plate she had broken, valued at $28,000. Her eyes burned with unshed tears as she screamed that I was an inhuman tyrant before turning and running away, sobbing into her hands. I simply shrugged. Honestly, she should be thanking me. I had just saved her life. The gala ended earlier than expected and Kieran and I returned home. With my parents busy expanding their business overseas, the entire mansion was now just the two of us. Originally, we had a few servants and a private chef, but Kieran found every possible excuse to dismiss them. He claimed he could take care of me himself, that he didn't want unnecessary people stealing my attention. More importantly, he didn't want anyone disturbing us. What could I do? The man was unhinged. I didn't want innocent people getting caught up in his madness, so I agreed. And honestly, looking back, from high school to university, Kieran had taken care of me exceptionally well. In the pitch-black room, I couldn't move. Darkness swallowed my vision, leaving my other senses heightened. Kieran made sure, obsessively, relentlessly, that every inch of his possession was marked with his scent. It wasn't until I was crying, begging for mercy, swearing over and over that he was my only one, that the blind dates were nothing more than fulfilling obligations to the elders, just a formality, that he finally let me go. For the last half of summer break, I barely left the mansion. Kieran's possessiveness ran deep. He wanted to keep me locked away. But I wasn't much of a social butterfly to begin with, so staying home was far more comfortable. Besides, when he wasn't being completely unhinged, Kieran was the most thoughtful, considerate little brother anyone could ask for. I never had to say a word, he always knew what I needed before I even asked. Like right now, for example, I was lazily leaning against his firm chest playing a game while he fed me strawberries one by one. Unfortunately, vacation had come to an end. School was starting again, which meant I had no choice but to step outside. The moment Kieran helped me out of the car, something unexpected happened. A mechanical voice echoed in my mind, cold and emotionless. Ding. Attention host. The target has entered your 10-meter range. I frowned, scanning my surroundings. And just like that, before I could even react, a familiar figure appeared right in front of us. It was her again. Skylar. Of course. Skylar was just another target capture player. How did I know? Because she wasn't the first. There had already been plenty of these people lurking around Kieran. I hated these so-called players. They barged into other people's lives uninvited, toying with their emotions for their own selfish goals. Then once they had what they wanted, they'd vanish, leaving behind nothing but scars on the people they used. Luckily, none of them had ever succeeded with Kieran, not even once, and I had never mentioned any of this to him. Skylar, oblivious to my irritation, squeezed herself between Kieran and me with a bright, clueless smile. She lifted her hand like a child showing off a prized possession, revealing a slightly squashed sandwich and a carton of milk. Her eyes were full of eager anticipation. Kieran, I brought you breakfast. You probably didn't eat enough, right? A cold wind swept past, stirring the fallen leaves on the ground. Silence. Even Kieran, along with the onlookers around us, felt completely quiet. I glanced at the rather pitiful breakfast in her hand and instantly felt like Skylar wasn't here to pursue a man. She was here for prison visitation. But Skylar seemed completely unaware of the awkwardness. Even when Kieran stepped back several paces to avoid her outstretched hand, she remained determined, shoving that greasy sandwich toward him. This sandwich is amazing. I got up at 6 this morning just to stand in line for it. It's the best I've ever had, so much meat. Before she could finish, she suddenly tripped over her own feet, lunging straight at Kieran, and somehow the sandwich and milk went flying toward me. Ah. My hand was still tightly held by Kieran, so I couldn't dodge even if I wanted to. But before I could even react, Skylar's dramatic scream nearly shook the heavens. I rolled my eyes. Great. At least now I have an excuse to go home. Crowded places weren't my thing anyway. But the embarrassment I was expecting never arrived. A shadow loomed over me, shielding me from the incoming mess. Kieran had stepped forward, taking the full impact of the splattering milk and falling sandwich. Kieran. He turned his head slightly, using his fingers to wipe away a few drops of white liquid from his cheek. Then looking at me, perfectly untouched, he let out a soft, reassuring smile. As long as you're okay, that's all that matters. With that, he casually shrugged off his jacket, giving his damp t-shirt a quick shake. But when his gaze fell to his wrist, where his crystal bracelet, the one I had given him, was now stained, his expression darkened slightly. That bracelet. Kieran had always treasured it. Knowing how severe his cleanliness obsession was, I instinctively reached out, ready to remove the bracelet from his wrist. "It's dirty now, just throw it away. I'll get you a new one." At that exact moment, Skylar's voice broke into a sob. "Evelyn, how could you throw that away? That's Kieran's most precious possession. You're so cruel. You just want to destroy everything he loves and hurt him, don't you?" I was stunned for a second before laughing out loud. "Oh right. And if you hadn't hurled milk all over us, I definitely wouldn't have had the opportunity to hurt Kieran." Skylar was left speechless, her face turning red. "You." At that moment, Kieran's icy voice cut through the air. "Miss, please stay away from me." His tone dripped with undisguised disgust. But Skylar? She was utterly oblivious. Tears welled up in her eyes, streaming down her cheeks as if she were the one who had been wronged. "I didn't mean to. I ruined your most precious bracelet. I'm so sorry. Please let me make it up to you. I'll clean it for you, I swear." Before either of us could react, she snatched the bracelet off his wrist. "I'll wash it for you. Meet me at the woods behind campus at 6:30 this evening, and I'll return it to you. You better come. If you don't, I swear I won't leave until you do." With that, she turned and ran off, like a thieving crow gleefully fleeing with stolen treasure. Kieran didn't even spare her a glance. He didn't want that bracelet anymore. My morning had been completely ruined by this ridiculous scene. A small crowd had gathered to gawk at the spectacle, murmuring and whispering amongst themselves. It was annoying. I just wanted to go home, crawl under my blankets and not deal with people. But I had a major class today and the professor was notorious for failing students who skipped. Instantly, my mood got even worse. Just then, Kieran leaned down, bringing his face close to mine, his beautiful eyes looking up at me with an expression of pure puppy-like devotion. "My clothes are dirty. My bracelet was stolen." His voice was soft, tinged with just the right amount of pathetic vulnerability. Looking at that perfect face right in front of me, my frustration melted in an instant. I let out a laugh, ruffling his hair. "All right, let's go clean you up first. Then later tonight I'll get revenge for you." Standing outside the restroom, I double-checked the sign on the men's door before discreetly slipping the bag of freshly bought clothes inside. Just as I was about to pull my hand back, a strong grip clamped down on my wrist. The next second I was yanked into the restroom. "Kieran, have you lost your mind?" My body instinctively tensed. I struggled against his hold, trying to break free, but he had already pinned me against the sink. "Relax. No one's coming in." Before I could retort, his lips crashed down on mine. It was a kiss so deep, so desperate, it stole the very breath from my lungs. The hunger in his eyes was unmistakable, a dangerous storm brewing, swallowing me whole. He wanted to go further. His body screamed for it. But in the end, his calloused hands merely caressed my waist, moving in slow, possessive strokes without crossing the line. This wasn't the right place. And more importantly, he knew I wouldn't want it. Yet, having the crystal bracelet snatched away had left him deeply unsettled. To him, it felt like a piece of my soul. A tether binding me to him had been ripped away. The sheer thought of losing me gnawed at him, sent him spiraling into an abyss of panic. And so he needed this. Needed to hold me, feel me, claim me, just to convince himself I was still here, that I wasn't leaving. I didn't know how long it lasted before Kieran finally loosened his grip. But even then, his arms remained firmly locked around me, his gaze red-rimmed as if he were on the verge of breaking. "Sister." His voice was fragile, his breath warm against my skin as he nuzzled into the curve of my neck. "You told me the crystal bracelet meant you were always with me, but now it's gone." A quiet sigh slipped past my lips. I leaned in and brushed a kiss against the delicate skin of his neck, letting my lips linger just long enough to leave a small, flushed mark. Satisfied, I traced my fingers over the faint red imprint and whispered, "This is your temporary mark. You're mine for life now, Kieran. You can't run, not anymore." Kieran's gaze flickered to the mirror, his fingers lightly ghosting over the mark on his neck. Then he chuckled. A low, throaty sound, dark and dangerous, curling in the air between us. "Then you'll have to mark me every day, sister." His voice dropped into a husky whisper, wrapping around me like a chain. "If I don't have your mark, if I don't have your approval, I might just break." A promise, a trap, a plea, a vow that bound not just me but him as well. That evening, Kieran never showed up to the so-called meeting. Instead, he took me across half the city just so we could try a new barbecue spot in the North End, because he knew I'd been craving it. The next morning, before the sun even rose, I was already awake. Kieran was still fast asleep beside me, his soft messy hair slightly covering his peaceful features. For a rare moment, he looked so young, so gentle. I couldn't resist. I leaned in and pressed a light kiss to his cheek before quietly slipping out of bed, wrapping myself in a long coat, and heading toward the wooded area behind campus. It didn't take long for me to find Skylar. She was shivering, curled up against a tree in nothing but a thin pink spaghetti strap dress and a pair of high heels, her teeth chattering violently. And yet, even as she sat there freezing, I could still hear her whispering to her system. System, are you really sure? If I manage to conquer Kieran, I'll get a $10 billion reward? The system's voice was cold, robotic. His host. Skylar gritted her teeth, her greedy eyes flickering with renewed determination. I won't fail. I've never failed before, not in my original world, not ever. One day Kieran will be at my feet. Thump. I deliberately stepped on a dry branch, making a sharp, splintering sound. Skylar instantly jumped up, her face lighting up with excitement. Kieran, I knew you'd come, I knew you'd. The moment she saw me, her voice died. Her expression twisted with disgust as she spat out my name. Why the hell is it you, Evelyn Sinclair? You didn't let Kieran come, did you? He's a free man, not your leash dog. You can't keep him chained forever. I scoffed. Funny. So you do understand the concept of freedom, and yet you're the one trying to turn him into your personal tool. Skylar's eyes twitched. She hesitated, then whispered urgently to her system. System, does Evelyn know something? The mechanical voice responded with absolute certainty. Impossible. No ordinary human can detect a system's existence. She is not a host. Skylar visibly relaxed. Her hands balled into tight fists as she glared at me with blazing fury. I can give Kieran happiness. What about you, huh? She snapped. You'll only bring him pain. You'll destroy him. I didn't hear a single damn word. Without hesitation, I grabbed a fistful of her hair and slapped her across the face, hard. She screamed and tried to scratch my face with her clawed fingers. I kicked her to the ground before she even got close, then stepped on her hand, pinning it to the dirt. She was beneath me, looking up, her face full of hatred and disbelief. I smirked. Skylar. My voice was calm, almost casual. People like you don't even deserve to say Kieran's name. I pressed down harder on her wrist, watching her squirm beneath my heel. So do yourself a favor, stay away. Otherwise, I said softly, it won't just be a broken arm next time. A sickening snap echoed through the silent forest. Ugh. Skylar's scream tore through the cold dawn air. I turned around and walked away, her wretched voice trailing after me like an insect buzzing in my ear. Evelyn, you won't get away with this, she shrieked. You'll pay for what you've done. Mark my words, karma will come for you. I didn't even bother responding. Karma? What a joke. If loving someone was a crime, then I was already beyond redemption. When I crawled back into bed, Kieran had already woken up. Noticing I wasn't in his arms, he reached out his long arms and pulled me right back in, his lips pressing a sticky, lazy kiss against the top of my head. His morning voice was so deep and husky, it nearly made me lose control. Mark me, he murmured. I sighed helplessly, flipping over and leaving a temporary mark in a more hidden spot on his body. I couldn't have Kieran walking around campus every day with visible hickeys on his neck. It would be far too eye-catching. After that incident, Skylar disappeared for a while and Kieran and I finally had a few days of peace. I even spent a fortune to track down a replica of his lost crystal bracelet, placing it back on his wrist, sealing him once again under my claim. After all, if I had to keep marking him every day, my waist wouldn't survive. That peace lasted until tonight, Kieran's 20th birthday. To celebrate, I decided to turn myself into a birthday cake for him. Kieran had never looked so deliriously happy. Sitting at the dining table, he slowly, patiently savored his precious 20th birthday gift, as if afraid of ruining it too quickly. The front door swung open. Standing in the doorway were my parents, who had been living abroad for years, living their separate lives, minding their own business. And behind them, Skylar. Her arm was wrapped in a cast, yet she still managed to stand tall and proud, her eyes burning with gleeful malice. She shot me a look filled with petty triumph and venomous mockery. Kieran was taken to another room. I changed my clothes and stood in the living room, just in time to receive a sharp slap from my mother. Her first words were filled with rage. How did I raise such a shameless disgrace of a daughter? Do you even realize that Kieran is our adopted son? He's your brother. Even if you don't share blood, you still can't do this. In a family like ours, reputation is everything. If this ever gets out, tell me, how do you expect your father and me to face the world? I lowered my head, saying nothing. Reputation? If they truly cared about that, they wouldn't have turned their marriage into a joke. Everyone in high society knew my parents' relationship was a loveless, well-maintained facade. A picture-perfect couple in public, yet leading separate, indulgent lives in private. Their opposition to Kieran and me had nothing to do with morals and everything to do with control. I was their pawn. A bargaining chip for a political marriage meant to increase their power and wealth. As always, my mother was decisive. After venting her anger, she cut straight to the chase. Break up with Kieran. Then pack your bags. We've already secured your admission into an Ivy League university. You'll finish your undergraduate and master's degrees there. I lifted my head and met her gaze, unwavering. I'm not breaking up with Kieran. I love him. She let out a cold, mocking laugh. You're still young, still foolishly obsessed with love. But trust me, once you reach my age, you'll realize that love is nothing but a lie. Power and wealth are the only things that matter in this world. I responded without hesitation. Then I'll take both. I won't give up power and wealth, but I won't give up Kieran either. Her expression twisted with ridicule. Evelyn, do you really think you can have it all? Do you even have what it takes? I didn't argue. I simply stated a fact. If I want something, I'll earn it myself. Loving someone isn't about empty promises and deceit. It's not about taking all the benefits while pretending to be a victim of circumstances. And I refuse to let the person I love live in the shadows while I parade around with someone else. If I love someone, I will love them openly, fiercely, and unapologetically. And I will never let him suffer. That must have hit a nerve. Because my mother, usually composed and cold, completely lost it. Her expression twisted into something ugly as she suddenly lunged at me, hand raised to slap me again. A shadow moved before I could react. A strong hand caught her wrist in midair, shielding me instinctively. Kieran. Looking at his tall, unwavering figure in front of me, my chaotic emotions suddenly settled. With him here, I had nothing to fear. My mother struggled, trying to wrench free from his grip. Kieran, get out of my way. This is my family's business. It has nothing to do with you. Kieran's eyes darkened. Andy, this was all my doing. Evelyn did nothing wrong. If you need someone to blame, then blame me. But I won't let you touch her. My mother's eyes were bloodshot, her breath ragged from rage. She stayed silent for a long time before finally slumping back onto the couch, her face filled with resentment and hatred. Her trembling hand lifted, pointing a sharp accusing finger at me. Evelyn, I should have never given birth to you. If it weren't for you, my life wouldn't have turned out like this. I knew. I always knew. Years ago, when my mother's first love came back looking for her, she had planned to leave my father and run away with him. But then she found out she was pregnant with me. My grandfather had forbidden her from getting an abortion. He made it clear, if she dared, she would be disowned, stripped of her inheritance, and thrown out of the family. So in the end, she stayed, and hated me for it. I was her biggest mistake, her eternal regret, her lifelong curse. She resented me because I ruined her chance at love. And because she was never allowed to have it, she would never let me have it either. After that day, Kieran and I were forcibly separated. I refused to leave the country. My mother couldn't physically drag me onto a plane, so instead she kept me locked in the mansion under her personal supervision. Kieran, on the other hand, was moved into a separate apartment, under 24-hour surveillance, guarded by bodyguards. We couldn't even exchange a single word during classes. My daily life had completely changed. Instead of spending time with Kieran, I was now forced into endless blind dates. My mother handpicked numerous men, all of them her ideal future son-in-law candidates. Some were hideously unattractive, some were plagued with scandals, but my mother turned a blind eye to their flaws. The only thing that mattered was that each of them could bring tremendous benefits to our family. My desires, my happiness, they were never part of the equation. This nightmare dragged on until the school's masquerade ball during the annual arts festival. That night I had to see Kieran, no matter what it took. I couldn't stand it any longer. Being without him was suffocating. Strangers kept invading my life. Their existence alone made me anxious, so much so that I had stopped sleeping at night. And then the opportunity finally came. Using drunkenness as an excuse, I tricked the bodyguards into going to buy me hangover medicine. The moment they left, I ran. I ran as fast as I could, toward the private lounge where Kieran Voss was staying. But just as I reached the door, just as I pushed it open a tiny crack, I froze. Inside, I heard Skylar's voice. Kieran, I am the only one in this world who can truly help you. I can give you unparalleled power. I can help you reclaim your true identity. I can make you the most respected titan of the financial world. I have a system, Kieran. I can give you more than Evelyn ever could. She only holds you back. To her, you're nothing more than a temporary plaything. She only keeps you around because you're obedient. The moment she finds a better, more useful toy, she'll throw you away like garbage. Tell me, what's more important, some fickle woman or absolute power and wealth? I didn't hear what came next, because at that moment the bodyguards caught up with me. They grabbed me. They overpowered me. I was dragged away. I didn't even get the chance to push the door open. Didn't even get the chance to run to Kieran. Didn't even get the chance to tell him that none of it was true. That I loved him. That I would never abandon him. I lost control. I went insane, thrashing and screaming, fighting desperately to get back to him. But I was no match for the bodyguards. I was thrown into the car. And I watched helplessly as the mansion grew smaller and smaller in the distance, taking Kieran further and further away from me. When I returned to the mansion, my mother was waiting for me. Her expression was dark and grim, a clear sign that she had already heard everything about what happened at the masquerade ball. I was furious. Like a caged animal, I fought and screamed, demanding that she let me go. I told her this was illegal, that kidnapping and imprisonment were crimes. I told her no real mother would ever treat their child like this. I told her she was unworthy of being a mother. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she used the family discipline rules on me. She demanded that I admit I was wrong, that I beg for mercy. I bit down on my lip and refused. The harder I resisted, the harder she struck, until I blacked out. When I woke up again, it was already the afternoon of the next day. A doctor was at my bedside, administering a fever-reducing injection. He must have pitied me because he leaned in and whispered softly, "You need at least a month of bed rest. Mother and daughter fights never last forever. Just give in a little. Your mother won't truly harm you." I said nothing, because my mind was somewhere else. I could only think of Kieran. Had he really believed Skylar's words? After a full month of recovery, I finally returned to school. But Kieran was already gone. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. And Skylar was gone too. No matter where I searched, I couldn't find him. When I learned the truth, I collapsed against the cold wall, sobbing uncontrollably. So, this is what our years of love amounted to. A few words from someone else, just enough to erase everything. Had I been delusional this entire time? Was our love even real? Or was it just dependence disguised as love? Eventually, my mother came to take me home. She spoke to me softly, her voice filled with the kind of world-weary certainty that only came from experience. "Men's love? Do you really believe in that? They'll say anything when they need you. They'll whisper sweet promises, tell you you're their world. But when they don't need you anymore, they'll walk away faster than anyone else, leaving you alone to pick up the pieces. Evelyn, I'm doing this for your own good. You deserve better. You deserve a man who can truly give you a future. Not someone like Kieran, who has nothing to offer you." I looked up at her, my eyes red and swollen from crying. For the first time in my life, I felt truly lost. But one thing was clear to me. If I stayed here, she would force me into marriage. She would throw me into a loveless life just like hers. A life without hope. A life where I would become her all over again. I didn't want that. I didn't want revenge on Kieran. I didn't hate him. I just wanted to move on. To live a life without him. And so, I finally gave in. I agreed to leave the country. The day I left the country, the news was buzzing with headlines. The long-lost biological son of the Voss family has returned. In just a few short months, Kieran had risen from obscurity to become one of the Voss family's sole heirs. He was now locked in a ruthless battle for power against the 4 legitimate successors of the Voss bloodline. Only one would ultimately claim the title of the Voss family head, the ruler of the most powerful financial empire. But none of that mattered to me anymore. For the next several years, I threw myself into my studies. I buried my head in books, in projects, in endless assignments, as if keeping my mind busy was the only way to forget about Kieran. I majored in design. By my 3rd year, I had already founded my own brand and began taking on small projects. My designs, a fusion of modern and vintage aesthetics, gradually gained recognition. By the time I graduated with a master's degree, I had already made a name for myself as a rising star in the design industry. I never forgot what I once vowed. I would never live my mother's life. Power and wealth should be held in my own hands, so that no one else could control my fate. And so, I broke free from my mother's grasp. At first, she tried everything to hold me back. She emotionally blackmailed me, cursed me, wept and screamed, even tried using the same tricks she once used on my father. But I had long since grown numb to it all. Family. At this point, it was nothing more than an optional accessory to me, something I could take or leave without a second thought. I never thought I'd return to this country again. But when a major design project ran into complications, my assistant informed me that the client refused to discuss it remotely. They insisted I come in person. In the end, I boarded the plane home. What I didn't expect was to run into Skylar at the client's mansion. The necklace I had designed. It wasn't for the client himself, but for someone else. And I had a pretty good idea who it was meant for. For a split second, an urge to escape surged in my chest. Not because of Skylar, but because I was afraid of seeing him. Skylar was visibly surprised when she saw me. She clearly hadn't expected me to be the designer behind this commission. But that shock faded quickly, replaced by a smug, arrogant smirk. She lifted her chin, eyes brimming with conceit. As I handed her the revised sketches, she suddenly asked, "Evelyn, can you picture it? One day I will be Mrs. Voss. And you? You're nothing but a measly designer. In my world, you're no different from the servants who work for me." I lifted my gaze, my expression unreadable. "Oh, so you're married now? Strange. I don't recall hearing about a Voss family wedding." Skylar's smug expression faltered. Her grip tightened slightly, but she forced herself to maintain composure. "Evelyn, Kieran will marry me. You left him. And now, seeing him as the heir to the Voss empire, you want to crawl back. That won't happen. I was the one who stayed by his side all these years. No childhood sweetheart could ever beat destiny." I watched her, the way she looked at me as if I were some kind of threat. And suddenly I found it hilarious. "If you were truly that confident, you wouldn't feel the need to tell me all this." Skylar's expression twisted in fury. In a fit of rage, she snatched the sketches from my hands and flung them into the air. The delicate designs fluttered down, scattering like broken butterfly wings. She sneered. "What kind of garbage is this? You spent all these years overseas and this is the best you can come up with? I've seen second-rate designers from cheap art schools do better." I said nothing. I crouched down, calmly picking up the fallen sketches. My assistant, sensing the tension, hurried over with a cup of tea, offering a polite smile. "Miss Schuyler, if there's anything unsatisfactory, we can certainly discuss adjustments." Before she could finish, slap, a sharp crack echoed through the room. Schuyler had struck her across the face. "Did I say you could speak?" she snapped, eyes flashing with irritation. Then in one swift motion, he grabbed the steaming hot tea and threw it all over my assistant. "Are you trying to burn me, you idiot?" A sharp cry of pain followed. My assistant stumbled back, soaking wet, her hair clinging to her face. It was summer. She was wearing a thin chiffon dress, and after being drenched in tea, the fabric clung to her, revealing glimpses of what lay beneath. Embarrassed, she froze, unsure of what part of herself to cover first. I quickly took off my jacket and draped it over her, then stepped forward and slapped Schuyler across the face, hard. One slap, then another. And as she stumbled back, I kicked her to the ground. For a moment, it felt like I was back in that schoolyard at dawn years ago. I coldly looked down at the fallen Schuyler. "I'll refund your design fee and pay the contract penalty. But for what you did to my assistant, I'll see you in court. Wait for your summons." Without another glance, I turned and led my assistant away. Behind me, Schuyler scrambled up from the ground, screaming hysterically. "Stop her. Catch that filthy bitch. I want her dead. I'll kill her." Yet none of the servants moved. Not one. They all stood still, eyes downcast, completely ignoring her insane outburst. Clearly, she had no real power over them. I didn't have time to think about what that meant. I just grabbed my assistant's hand and hurried toward the exit. The mansion was huge. The distance between the front door and the estate's outer gates was at least 2 or 3 kilometers. And the car we arrived in had already left. If we wanted to get out, we had to walk. The blazing sun bore down on us as we trudged forward, step by step. My heels were absolute torture, digging into my feet with every step. But the pavement was scorching hot, so taking them off wasn't an option either. I limped forward, one arm wrapped around my assistant's for support. The two of us looked utterly pathetic. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked. "Maybe we should find a temple and pray, get rid of this bad luck." My assistant, seeing that I could still joke after everything, laughed too. We kept chatting as we walked and I kept smiling. But that smile didn't last long. As suddenly, a car pulled up beside us. The door swung open. And from inside, a familiar yet distant figure stepped out. Slowly, deliberately, walking straight toward me. Kieran still looked as young as when he was 20, but now his shoulders were broader, his presence suffocating with the authority of a man in power. He was no longer the boy who clung to me, whispering sweet nothings, treating me as his entire world. Everything had changed. I tilted my head up, staring at Kieran, and he stared back. His dark eyes were turbulent, filled with emotions I couldn't decipher. Suddenly, I couldn't bear to look at him. I dropped my gaze and limped past him, my voice calm but distant. "Excuse me. Step aside." But just as I was about to brush past him, his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. I lost my balance, stumbling straight into his broad, warm chest. The sudden impact stung my nose and my eyes reddened involuntarily. I didn't dare to lift my head, my voice hoarse as I whispered, "Let me go." Kieran said nothing. His palm pressed against my waist, firm and unyielding. And before I could struggle, my feet left the ground. He picked me up effortlessly and carried me into his car before I could even react. My assistant, pale with shock, clapped her hands over her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. I pressed myself against the car window, watching the scenery blur as we drove away, leaving her frozen behind us. I gasped, calling her name, but before I could finish, Kieran wrapped his arms around me, pulling me against his chest. His voice was low, tinged with a dangerous softness. "Don't look at anyone else, or I'll get jealous." I shoved him away, my expression cold as ice. "Kieran, what exactly gives you the right to say things like that?" His lips parted slightly as if he wanted to say something, but I didn't give him the chance. "There's nothing between us anymore." The pain in his eyes deepened, as if I was the one who abandoned him, not the other way around. The car came to a stop. A butler stepped forward, opening the door. Without hesitation, I jumped out. Kieran followed immediately, stepping in front of me, blocking my way, his expression desperate. "Don't go." I didn't know how to face him. Didn't know what to say. I could only lift my chin, my eyes red, my voice firm. "Kieran, I'm getting married. The moment you left me behind, whatever we had was over." The word marriage seemed to send a violent tremor through him. His eyes darkened, his muscles tensed, and the next second he grabbed me without a word and carried me inside. I struggled with everything I had. "Kieran, let me go." He acted as if he couldn't hear me at all. Desperate, I lashed out, a sharp slap landing across his face. The room fell silent. The sound of the slap echoed through the hall, and around us the servants collectively gasped. I froze, staring at the red mark blossoming on his cheek, suddenly feeling uneasy. This was no longer the helpless, obedient boy who once depended on me. This was a man I couldn't afford to provoke anymore. All I wanted was a peaceful life, away from trouble. A voice interrupted the tense moment. "Kieran, you're back." For the first time in my life, I felt grateful for Skylar's presence. She rushed toward him, arms outstretched, as if she was about to throw herself into his embrace. But then she froze, her eyes locking onto me in his arms. A flash of hatred and disbelief crossed her face before she screamed. "Evelyn, you filthy bitch. I knew you came back just to seduce Kieran again. You. Shut up." Kieran's sharp reprimand instantly silenced Skylar. She stood there, her lips quivering, tears welling up in her eyes as she clutched her cheek, revealing the red mark left by my slap. Her voice was thick with grievance as she sobbed. "Kieran, this woman is violent. Look at what she did to me, she slapped me so hard." But Kieran merely cast her a disinterested glance, his tone completely indifferent. "Oh, if my sister hit you, you must have deserved it. You should reflect on what you did wrong." Skylar froze as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Kieran, how could you say that to me?" But Kieran didn't even spare her another look. His sharp gaze shifted to the butler, his voice dropping to a dangerous low. "If you let another irrelevant person into this house again, you're fired." A cold sweat broke out on the butler's forehead. He immediately lowered his head, his voice trembling as he responded. "Understood, sir. I'll handle it right away." Kieran adjusted his hold on me and started walking up the stairs. Skylar's angry cries faded behind us, swallowed by the vast silence of the mansion. I never expected Kieran to bring me to his bedroom. The room was exactly the same as before. Monochrome, black, white, and gray. Minimalist, cold, detached. Just like him. As if nothing in this world could truly interest him. He placed me gently on the large black silk bed. I sat at the edge, hands resting on the sheets, watching as Kieran knelt before me just as he used to. He lifted my foot onto his knee, carefully undoing the straps of my high heels. Pain flared through my feet. The blisters had broken, leaving raw wounds, staining the soft lambskin interior of my heels with blood. I felt a pang of regret for the ruined shoes. But Kieran? He simply tossed them aside. "Stop wearing high heels if you're going to walk that much." I shot him a pointed look. If a certain someone hadn't arranged for that deal, I wouldn't have gone through all this. Kieran tilted his head, flashing me a playful smile. "If I didn't, how else would I trick you into coming back?" I froze, staring at him in disbelief. "You planned this." Kieran sighed, carefully disinfecting the wounds on my feet. "If I hadn't, would you have ever come back?" I fell silent. Guess he was right. And then it hit me, he had always known where I was. He just never came for me. A strange feeling settled in my chest, something heavy and suffocating. Pain. Disappointment. Kieran finished bandaging my foot, then sat beside me, pulling me into his arms. His voice was low, apologetic. "When I returned to the Voss family, it was chaos. People wanted me dead. If they knew you meant something to me, they would have used you against me. I couldn't risk that." It was true. Over the years, Voss heirs had been killed, exiled, or ruined. The old patriarch had only handed Kieran full control of the family 3 months ago. I believed him, but my heart still clenched. And Skylar? That night at the masquerade, I heard her say she could help you. She told you to go with her, and then you disappeared. You didn't even leave me a message. Kieran's gaze darkened, but instead of getting angry, he laughed softly. So that's what this is about. He ran his fingers through my hair, voice laced with amusement. I never agreed to Skylar's proposal. I saw you outside the hallway that night, but when I went after you, you were already gone. After that, you vanished. I tried going to your house, but your mother had me thrown out. Actually, she didn't just throw me out. She had her men beat me, broke 3 of my ribs. I spent 2 months in the hospital. By the time I got out, you had already left the country. I told myself, if I wasn't strong enough to protect what's mine, I didn't deserve you yet. So I went back to the Voss family and fought for my place. I needed power, enough that no one could take you from me again. And as for Skylar, I already knew I was a Voss before she ever approached me. Everything I have now, I won through my own strength. Skylar, she was just another annoying gnat who didn't know when to quit. My eyes burned. So many misunderstandings. And yet, I had never once questioned them. I had believed what I saw, what I heard. And I assumed Kieran had abandoned me. Tears spilled over as I threw my arms around him, holding him tight. Holding on to all the lost time we had missed. Kieran, this time, I won't leave you again. No one could ever separate us again. While I was fighting for my freedom, he had been fighting for our future. But just as I settled into his arms, Kieran's deep voice rumbled against my ear. Now that I've told you everything, it's your turn to explain, my dear sister. Who's the fiancé? My entire body stiffened. Shit. I had completely forgotten about the ridiculous lie I blurted out earlier. And judging by the possessive, dangerous glint in Kieran's eyes, he hadn't. In the end, I had to beg for mercy, swearing on my life that there was no fiancé, no other man, that I had been single this entire time. Sleep eventually took me, and just before I drifted off, I felt Kieran's arms tighten around me. His voice was a whisper, dark and deadly. You can be mad at me, hate me, take as long as you want to forgive me. I'll wait. But you will never belong to anyone else. If you ever fall for another man, I will kill him. And I will lock you away where no one else can ever take you from me again. A shiver ran down my spine. But somewhere in my half-conscious state, I found myself accepting it. If I was destined to be trapped, then Kieran was destined to be trapped with me. That was just how we were meant to be. I had been living in Kieran's mansion for over a month. Kieran took care of everything personally. He wouldn't even allow the servants to help. It was as if we had returned to those years in the villa, where it was just the 2 of us in our own world. 1 month later, at the Voss family group's annual gala, Kieran told me he had a surprise for me. I stood in the crowd, watching as he stood on stage, the center of attention. Yet, despite the hundreds of eyes on him, his gaze never left me. His deep, magnetic voice echoed through the grand hall. Tonight, I stand here to thank someone. Someone who pulled me out of darkness and despair. Someone who brought me light. Someone who saved me from hell and brought me to this beautiful world. A wave of murmurs swept through the audience, people whispering, trying to guess who he was talking about. Could it be Skylar? I heard she's been by Kieran's side all these years. That woman, didn't she barely graduate high school? No background, no status. How could she possibly be worthy of marrying the future head of the most powerful family? But Skylar has a crystal bracelet, the same one Kieran wears. Hearing these whispers, I quickly pieced together what must have happened over the years. So Skylar hadn't just been following Kieran around, she had used the crystal bracelet she stole from me to lie her way into high society, parading around as the future Mrs. Voss. But these people weren't fools. They could see the truth. Then an all too familiar sound suddenly rang in my ears, something I hadn't heard in years. Ding. Last warning. The host has 10 minutes remaining to complete the final target. If the target is not successfully acquired, the system will detach and the host will lose everything. I frowned. The guest list was invitation only. Skylar was never invited. So how did she get in? I shifted my gaze from Kieran, scanning the crowd until I found her. Skylar was approaching me, dressed in a server's uniform, gripping a wine bottle tightly. A bad feeling crept up my spine. I instinctively stepped back, but Skylar lunged at me, her face twisted with rage. Evelyn, why did you steal Kieran from me? I gave up everything for him, and you? I'll destroy you. Once you're gone, Kieran will come back to me. Before the wine could reach me, Kieran leapt off the stage, shielding me with his body. Security immediately swarmed forward, pinning Skylar to the ground as the wine bottle shattered against the floor. The strong, acrid scent that followed made my blood run cold. It wasn't wine. It was sulfuric acid. The moment people realized, terrified gasps filled the room. Guests stumbled back, barely avoiding a stampede, while trained staff contained the chaos. Kieran stared at the corroding floor, his arms tightening around me. His voice was hoarse, still shaken. "Thank God you're safe." I smiled softly, lacing my fingers through his. "With you here, I'll always be safe. I wouldn't dare not be." Behind us, Skylar's screams grew hysterical. Her time was running out. The system's countdown was hammering in her mind, pushing her to the brink of madness. "Kieran, you can't do this to me. I gave up everything for you. How could you abandon me?" The room buzzed with murmurs. The onlookers glanced at Kieran, their gazes filled with judgment. Kieran didn't care. He never did. Public opinion meant nothing to him. But I did. I refused to let Kieran be labeled as the villain in Skylar's delusions. I stepped out from behind him, walking straight to Skylar. And then, without hesitation, I slapped her across the face. Hard. Then again. And again. Her head snapped to the side, her cheeks burning red. "Skylar, everything was just in your head. Kieran was never yours. You thought that just because you had some ridiculous system you could conquer him and take the Voss fortune. That's why you threw everything away to chase him. But you never had a chance. Kieran never wanted you. Every decision he has ever made has been for me. Whether it was leaving the Voss family or going back. He belongs to me. And you were never even a part of the story." Something in Skylar's eyes shattered. She screamed, her voice raw and desperate. "But I love him more than anyone. Evelyn, what have you ever done for him? You abandoned him. You left him for your own selfish freedom while I sacrificed everything. You don't love him at all." I laughed. Her words were so pathetic, so delusional, it was almost tragic. "And yet he still loves me." I grabbed her by the collar, leaning in close, my lips curling into a slow, cruel smile. I leaned in close, my lips barely moving as I whispered, only for her to hear. 10 seconds. Say goodbye to your system. Struggling is useless." Skylar's eyes widened in shock, sheer disbelief flashing through them. How do you know?" Almost simultaneously, the countdown blared inside her mind, the mechanical voice ringing out in relentless precision. "System unbinding countdown. 10, 9, 8. Skylar panicked. She screamed, begged, pleaded for the system not to abandon her. But the system was just an AI, devoid of emotion, impervious to her desperation. It gave her nothing. The countdown reached 0. Unbinding complete. "No." Skylar's scream tore through the grand hall before her eyes rolled back and she collapsed. Guards swiftly removed her unconscious body, but Kieran barely spared her a glance. Instead, he was fidgeting with the crystal bracelet on his wrist, his expression dark with frustration. I was planning to propose, and then this happened. A chuckle escaped my lips. Reaching into his jacket, I pulled out the small velvet box he had hidden there and held out my hand. "I'm saying yes. Put it on for me." Kieran's entire demeanor shifted. A gleam of something wild and unfathomable flickered in his deep-set eyes. "You're saying yes?" I locked eyes with him, my lips curving into a soft smile. "Yes. I want to be with you always. No reason needed. Just say the word and I'll always choose you." We had lost years to misunderstandings, years we could never get back. But the future, that we could claim together. I had never been someone who played games with love. I loved him and that was all that mattered. No hesitation. No regrets. As Kieran slipped the ring onto my finger, I grabbed his tie, pulling him down, sealing the moment with a kiss. For all the years ahead, for every morning and every night, for forever. I would love my dark, possessive lover.